Welcome back to the Liberty Perspective. I'm Joe Marshall. I got a show for you today kind of centered on Brownstone, the Brownstone Institute. Ever since I went to that Brownstone thing down in Pittsburgh last November, I've been getting emails every week. But, or every, I don't know, whatever they send them out, every week maybe. But anyways, I checked them out, and I've done shows on the Brownstone Institute before as, human rights advocates and their human rights advocacy versus our actual founding principles and individual rights and liberty. But they haven't changed. They haven't changed. They're still promoting the, well, I'm just going to go through what you said and show you what they sent me. We're going to go down through some of the players. They got this thing called Repair. It's called Repair that they're doing through the University of Leeds over in England. And supposedly they're going to stop the WHO, the World Health Organization, and they're going to promote individual sovereignty against, the globalism of the World Health Organization and the United Nations, right? But are they really? We're going to take a look at some of the these people that they've got involved, that they've got listed, and I want to get right into this because I got a little bit to go down through for you, some information. I did some digging, I did some digging into these people that are involved with some of these different, medical freedom movement organizations that have been out there. Brownstone being one of them. I've been kind of keeping an eye on them. Are these guys a bunch of progressives? Libertarians, libertarian socialists, anarcho-capitalists, or whatever, progressives that have seen the errors of the progressive ways and are now promoting our founding principles. Is the free society, the parallel society that they keep talking about, does it have anything to do with our founding principles? Or are they just promoting the same old world socialism, the same old world collectivism, just repackaging it in more liberty sounding ways and more America's founding principles, more? Are they repackaging it to trick us into thinking that they're actually fighting for these things? We're going to go down through it. Anyways, I put a little something together here that I want to go down through. The title of this show is Brownstone and the Intellectual Sabotage of America, Our Founding Principles, Republic, Rights, and Liberty. That would be our natural, endowed by our Creator, rights and liberty, in more of a Lockean, John Locke, that are derived from a John Locke type of state of nature where God hasn't been dismissed, or an argument against the very existence of God hasn't been presented as it has been in progressive collectivist, secular progressive collectivist, anarchist, whether it's anarcho-capitalist or whatever, societies. That's the difference between our individual rights and liberty and any sovereign individual sovereignty, or supposedly any individual human rights that are derived from this world socialism or world collectivism. They speak of their natural rights, but their natural rights aren't the state of nature, aren't endowed by nature or nature's God. They're from reason, or from us just being human. There's a difference. It's subtle, but in the end, the consequence is the difference between slavery and actual freedom, between emancipation and enslavement. And it's subtle, but if you don't see it, and I'm just going to point out what's going on, some of these things that I've looked into here. Now, the human rights, as I've said before in the last show that I did, are slave speak. for world collectivism, world socialism. You think you're fighting for our individual rights and liberty, our founding principles, or America as founded, our constitutional republic, and the liberties secured therein? If you're speaking in terms of human rights, you've already surrendered them, because human rights come from the collectivism actually targeting them for destruction. Matter, antimatter. First, a look at there's a stupid, complicated, what I call stupid, complicated convolution of simplicity and the difference between the individualism of our natural, unalienable, endowed by our Creator, negative individual rights and liberty, meaning negative, a few years back when Obama was president or running for president, he referred to a Constitution on a 60 Minutes interview he did. He referred to the Constitution as a charter of negative liberties. And like I said before, the first time I heard him say that, it actually pissed me off. But in the end, because I didn't understand what negative liberties were versus positive charter liberties. Well, communist countries, the Soviet, I go over this in my book, Last Call for Liberty. You can see it right there. And I go over it in my book. I think it's the second chapter. I'm not sure. I can't remember the difference of what a positive charter is. In prison today, here, inmates in prison have rights, and they're positive rights because they've lost the liberty to provide any of them for themselves. So the state has to act positively from law or whatever to establish that these people get this right. And it's like, they get. Animals in the wild have negative rights to survive. They're whatever they need to do to naturally survive, right? But once we put them in a cage, then they have animal rights that we got to feed them. They have rights to a clean cage. They have a right to freaking food, water, and everything else. If we don't provide them, we get arrested. Same with inmates. The state is responsible to provide positive rights. The Soviet Union Constitution provides positive rights to the people because they don't have the liberty to provide any of that shit for themselves, because the free enterprise and free market capitalism is outlawed. It's illegal. The free exchange of property owned for property desired for an individual to allow for an individual pursuit of happiness is illegal in communist countries. So our Constitution is not a positive charter. It's a charter limiting government to secure our negative liberties. Human rights, they say, are derived of both negative and positive, but you can't separate the negative rights, supposedly, of human rights, because the individual rights that are supposed to be the natural from the secular natural rights of human rights are they cannot be spoken of outside the context of the duties that you owe. And the duties that you owe is that the needs of the individual become subordinate to the needs of the collective. Okay? There's no way that the needs of rights of an individual can possibly outweigh the rights of the collective of the society. So when they clash, you lose. It's automatic. And like Rousseau said, like I went over in that last show I did, like Rousseau said that, the dangers to which we are to submit ourselves are no longer our decision to make. It's no longer our decision. It's the state. And if the state says we need to die and expose ourselves to danger that we could die from, then we should do that, because it's only upon the condition that we live in, that's the state and society that we live in, the condition of the social contract, that we even have a life, that we even have rights. So that's part of the responsibilities. That's doctrinaire. That's just doctrinaire. It can't be avoided. And people don't want to see that aspect of it, And that's what I'm going down here. This difference between positive rights and negative rights is really simple. Negative rights are the rights that are endowed to us by our Creator. And positive rights are the ones that government provides for us by an act of, positive action. Going to kind of go down through these things because they convolute it to make it hard for people to understand. So the individualism of our natural, unalienable, endowed by our Creator, negative individual rights. That's the negative individual rights endowed by our Creator. Be it nature or nature's God. You don't have to be a Christian or a faith-based thing. But because there's free will in that, endowed by your Creator, individual rights and liberty. And the world collectivism or socialism of both conditional realities of human rights, of positive human civil origin. So our rights that are of human civil origin, that's what human rights are. They're rights of civil human origin. You didn't have them until human society, civil society said you did, and passed laws that forced people into compliance, thereby forcing us all to be free. Right? The academics at the so-called right-wing conservative Heritage Foundation are no less stuck in the cult of collectivist mindset box. There was an article that I read at the Heritage Foundation. We're going to go over this. They're just as stuck in the collectivist mindset as any of these people that are pushing for these human rights, that are pushing for sustainability, that are pushing for redistributive justice of sustainable development goals and Agenda 2030 and ESG and DEI and all that stuff, right? And the Heritage Foundation is supposed to be conservative, more of our founding principles type of an organization, or at least that's what they portray, right? But are they? I don't know. Coffee. I just got rained out in the field. We're digging trees and it just got rained out. So I thought I'd come up here and make myself a cup of coffee, come up and record this stuff that I've had ready been getting it ready for the past week. Well, actually, I've been getting this show ready, trying to get it ready for about a month now, I think. Been working on putting it together, but more so in the past couple of days. Yeah. So the Heritage Foundation is no less stuck in the cult of collectivist mindset box because they're not thinking outside that box, and therefore unable to think out of it from the actual unalienable natural God-given rights and liberty perspective than any other progressive collectivist, right or left. Now, there's a difference. I think I went over this in the going down through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They're inalienable. They can't be separated from. Okay? And what I'm saying is that they can't be separated from the social contract. Unalienable. Our rights are unalienable in our Declaration of Independence. You can read it. You can go back to that show and watch it if you want. Put it right out there. It's unalienable. They're not inalienable. Our rights in the declarations are individual, natural, endowed by our Creator rights are unalienable. There's no lien on them. There's no lien that can be put on them. They're outside the jurisdiction of government to put a lien on. Our government was instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government, from the consent of the governed. We don't get our liberty and our rights and stuff from government. Government got its limited powers from us, and to understand it any other way is to understand how our founding republic was founded in a progressive, hostile, postmodern manner, collectivist manner. And this is just what I'm trying to put out there for your consideration, so that at least somebody somewhere is putting this out there, because there's nobody, I don't see anybody anywhere even putting, everybody's just letting it go, letting it fly. And people supposedly champions of our republic, champions of our constitutional republic, and the individual rights and liberties secured in there, are just letting this stuff fly like, human rights and our individual rights and liberty. They're the same thing, man. Come on, Joe, get with it. You're trying to champion an antiquated version of individual rights and liberty. Well, if our founding principles, as per what our founding fathers said they were, is antiquated, then let it be antiquated. At least they won't be convoluted with the pseudo liberty, the pseudo rights and liberty of collectivism that have actually been instituted to sabotage our actual founding principles in republic, and replace it with a collectivist version of them. But here's that article from the Heritage Foundation: How Collective Human Rights Undermine Individual Human Rights. Do you see what I'm saying? How collective human rights undermine individual human rights. As if collective human rights were, if individual human rights weren't collective. You know, the summation here is that individual human rights aren't collective rights. The reality is, doctrinarily, philosophically, and even in human rights law itself. Look at the Frey Report, the United Nations reports. Individual human rights are just as collective. They come with the same responsibilities and duties owed to the collective. This guy, person Aaron Rhodes, is an international human rights advocate. So you've got the Heritage Foundation putting out an article by an author who is a international human rights advocate. Okay. Human rights editor of Dissent magazine, a project of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. So they got a victim of communism out there defending the, I don't know. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, they're going to the human rights and how collective human rights undermine individual human rights. I don't know, does anybody else see that? Does anybody else see the false dichotomy here? Because it's all the same. The human rights, individual rights, and collective rights are all the same world socialism, all the same world communism. World communism is world socialism, is world collectivism. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Let's read some of this article. Well, here's the article right here. How collective human rights under but this is how people get confused, and I'm trying to unconfuse you and show you that it's a false dichotomy. Sadly, after an hours-long read, the author never once leaves his own wholly biased collectivist mindset to even once so much as consider that in the world socialist human organism, reality of human rights, in the world socialist human organism, reality of human rights, all rights and liberties, individual or otherwise, are collectivist, are collective rights. It's the rights of society that matter. If you're individual, if you had an individual right, human right, even so much as an individual right to life, that outweighed the collective, then there wouldn't be such a thing. Then there would be such a thing as a human right to self-defense. But there is no human right to self-defense, and the United Nations itself has said so in the Frey Report, which I've gone over in other shows. Right? One. Right. So they're not even so much as consider that the world socialist human organism reality of human rights, all rights and liberties, individual or otherwise, are collectivist rights. They are collective rights, which, one, as Rousseau's social contract plainly spells out, are conditional. They're conditional. And two, as Comte put it, cannot be spoken of, Auguste Comte, the guy who came up with altruism, the guy who came up with sociology, the queen of all sciences. As Auguste Comte put it, they cannot be spoken of outside the context of the duties owed back to the collective state from which they came, or society, right? Including any and all so-called individual human rights, individual collective rights. Note, there is no human right to bear arms. As per the UN's own Frey report, there's actually no such thing as a human right to self-defense, not even self-defense. If you don't have a right to self-defense, how can you have a right to the arms to which to defend yourself with? There's no such thing as a human right to self-defense. Therefore, there is no such thing as a human right to bear to the arms in which to defend your life. And if you don't have a right to self-defense and or the right to any arms to which to defend yourself with, so much as a pitchfork doesn't matter, how could you possibly have a right to life? If you had a right to life, you'd have a right to defend it and a right to the arms in which to defend it with. Every once in a while out there, the difference between the subtle difference, well, it's not a subtle difference, it's a catastrophic difference that is sometimes hard to decipher because they convolute the two. They become convoluted. People see them as the same things. But there's a catastrophic difference. And to understand your actual individual rights and liberty, our founding principles, individual rights and liberty, as human rights, is to sabotage your actual individual rights and liberty. And that's where I'm going with this whole show about Brownstone, the intellectual powerhouses at Brownstone. Are they actually fighting for an actual free society? Our society is founded, which was a free society. Or are they fighting for just the same old frickin' world socialism? Wittingly or unwittingly fighting for the same old world socialism that the left is, just in a matter that, I don't know, they're trying to trick us, or are they just fooled themselves? I don't know. Yeah, so, note that there's no human right to bear arms. There is no human right to bear arms. As per the UN's own Frey report, there's actually no such thing as a human right to self-defense, let alone an armed one. Where there is no right to self-defense, there can be no right to life. Right. The United Nations Frey report itself reiterates the only right to life recognized by the world collectivism of human rights is the life of the collective. And this is that human rights Frey report, United Nations Frey report. You can get it on here. Let me see. Yeah, for English, I need to go to English. There's different languages up here. Let me see. Is it English? Human Rights Council, July 27th, 2006. That's the one. Barbara Frey. See it? Final report submitted by Barbara Frey. Barbara Frey report. And you can go right down through here and basically see for yourself. I'm taking quotes right out of that. The United Nations Frey report itself reiterates the only right to life recognized by the world collectivism of human rights, the world socialism of human rights, is the life of the collective, per the UN Frey report itself, per the United Nations in that report in 21. No international human right to self-defense is expressly set forth in the primary source of international law, treaties, customary law, or general principles. That's the United Nations, people. Do you still think they're the same as our founding principles and our founding, individual rights and liberty? That's what I'm being told. By people who should know better. 23. Similarly, international criminal law sets forth self-defense as a basis for avoiding criminal responsibility, not as an independent right. So you might possibly be able to avoid criminal responsibility for defending yourself. Even if there were a human right to self-defense, this is in 34 of that Frey report, even if there were a human right to self-defense, it would not negate the state's due diligence responsibility to maximize protection of the right to life for society, for the society. individual rights are collective rights. Individual human rights are collective rights that are secondary, subordinate to maximizing protection of the right to life for the society. And that's how there is no when the National Rifle Association, which I went over in my last show, how the National Rifle Association is out there trying to defend the Americans' right to arms and self-defense as fundamental human rights. You know, you can't have an individual right to anything that isn't subordinate to the rights of the collective, and that's how they're doing it. The rights of the people to a safe and secure environment, the rights to people, the right of the collective, the right of the masses, the right of society to a safe and secure environment, cannot be trumped by an individual human right to the guns that collectivism has said are a health problem to the collective, right? That are a danger to the collective. You see can you see it? 39, the right to self-defense in international law is not directed toward the preservation of lives of individuals in the targeted country. It is concerned with the preservation of the state. It can't be put any clearer. That's the United Nations. No international human right to self-defense is expressly set forth in the primary sources of international law, treaties, customary law, or general principles. The right of self-defense in international law is not directed towards the preservation of the lives of individuals. It is concerned with the preservation of the state. Period. Still think they're the same as our founding principles? You still think they're the same as our actual individual rights and liberty as put forth in our Declaration of Independence? Why would the conservative? This is an article that was putting these collective human rights versus the individual human rights, saying how that the collective for the society was being we're undermining the individual. It's all one. You can't. The only thing you can do is. It's impossible. And this is the thing that I'm trying to put out there with this whole show is that what these people say that they're doing and fighting for our individual rights and liberty as human rights, they're fighting for the doctrinarily, philosophically, and as you can see in international human rights law, straight up impossible. They're straight up impossible. It's an impossibility. It's impossible for us to have an individual human right to self-defense and a right to life that stands apart and superior to the government. When it's impossible. It's impossible for us to have an individual human right to not wear a mask if the planners have deemed it that that's what's best for the collective, that the needs of the collective outweigh the needs. See, you can't. It's impossible. You don't have. No longer, we're no longer the judge to what dangers that we submit ourselves to, or are submitted to, or exposed to. You don't have. It's impossible to have an individual human right to not take the jab in that. It's impossible not to have. It's impossible that we would have an individual human right to not wear a mask or not get a jab. It's impossible. This exposes the bullshit. That's all bullshit. And it's right there in UN's own doctrines that prove it, that show it. You know, prove is a big word. You can show it, you know. Just putting it out there for your consideration. I don't think there's anybody anywhere else that's saying it. I don't even think G. Edward Griffin is going to point this stuff out. Seeing how he was involved with the world collectivism of Sasha Stone, I mean, what the hell, right? And if you don't understand how that, I mean, where are these people, these icons, these sentries that have been out there? Our sentries. I mean, it was Rush Limbaugh. Then it was, Mark Levin, Glenn Beck. They've all proved to be fakes. They've all proved to be charlatans. They've all thrown liberty under the bus. They've all thrown liberty and our Constitution and our founding principles under the bus. And, I don't know. It's hard because all these people that I thought were out there as champions of our who claim to be champions of our individual rights and liberty, and then they throw their hat and all their weight and everything behind the progressivism of this candidate or that candidate because he has an R. They have an R. So as long as they have an R, we'll throw our individual rights and liberty and our Constitution under the bus so that we can have a guy in there that'll do it with an R in front of his name. No, this is just kind of the frustration of trying to see all this stuff happen when you're actually. All I'm trying to do is give voice to what our founding principles actually are in this mess that's been made of the left-right false dichotomy between left and right, the false dichotomy between collective human rights and individual human rights, between positive human rights and negative human rights. It's all false dichotomy between all of it. They're all the same. It's all the same, Yeah, so why would the conservative, quote unquote, right, Heritage Foundation have Aaron Rhodes, one of the leading human rights activists in the world? That's what they call them, Aaron Rhodes, one of the leading human rights activists in the world, allegedly advocating on behalf of our individual rights and liberty in the context of the world socialism/communism of human rights that has actually targeted them for destruction unless they, as agents of the progressive collectivist change revolution themselves, are also human rights advocates. Or are they just that trained? Or are they stupid? Are they doing it on purpose? I don't know. I know there's doctrinaire intellectuals out there that are, they're ideological collectivists, ideological communists, ideological collectivists, world collectivists, pretending to be something that they're not in pushing these human rights. Here's another article futilely arguing for human right to arms and self-defense from within the collectivism of world socialism's international human rights law, which, like the UN Frey report, consider both to be a violation of human rights of others, the human rights of others, aka society or the collective, thus therefore obligate government to severely limit, if not abolish, any and all laws and or constitutions that allow for rights or secure the rights to the contrary. Human rights self-defense. This article came out and it was seen as and understood by people as a champion of our individual rights to arms and but when you actually read the article, so any and this is the article right here, just to show it really quick. The human right to self. This came out right shortly thereafter that Frey report did. And it's kind of a critique in the Freire report about saying that is a critique of the Freire report, because the Freire report says that there is no human right to self-defense. This was a critique from within those same human rights, saying that there was. So now you got a critique within that collectivism, and it doesn't. Just put what I got, a little piece here for you from the introduction. Any law, international or municipal, which prohibits recourse to force is necessarily limited by the right of self-defense. Is there a human right to defend oneself against a violent attacker? Is there an individual right to arms under international law? Conversely, our government's utility of conversely, are governments guilty of human rights violations if they do not enact strict gun laws and gun control laws? According to the philosophy of collectivism and human rights, yeah, that's where it becomes a problem, right? Because the needs of the collective and the rights of the collective far outweigh any needs or rights of the individual. It's part of the social contract. The United Nations and some non-governmental organizations have declared that there is no human right to self-defense or to the possession of defensive arms. The United Nations and allied NGOs further declared that insufficiently restrictive firearm laws are themselves a human rights violation. See, this is where I'm not the only one to see it. But these people are pointing this out. So all governments must sharply restrict citizens' firearms possession. This article investigates the legal status of self-defense by examining a broad variety of sources of international law. So this article right here that I'm showing you, this Human Rights of Self-Defense by David Koppel and Gallant and Eisen, right? They're going to go out there and they're going to prove all these people wrong by examining a broad variety of sources of international law. The international collectivism, the international socialism of international law, which is our human rights, come from that same shit. The United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So they're going to go to that same socialism, that same collectivism, that internationalism. So whatever they say is in existence there as far as protecting the individual, it becomes immediately impossible, regardless of what they say, regardless of what they point out. It becomes a false dichotomy again within the collectivism of human rights, because it's doctrinarily, philosophically, and as we've seen in United Nations international human rights law, legally impossible. It's legally impossible. So if you think they're going to fight you think these people are out there fighting for this stuff, they think they're fighting for our founding principles, think again, because they're fighting from within the philosophy that's actually targeting everything that America has been since the very idea of America, our founding republic, our principles, our founding principles, our individual rights and liberty, our constitutional republic. They've all been targeted by this collectivism for destruction. And somehow they're going to find something within that collectivist revolution to say that we have a right to the things they've targeted for destruction. Can you see where I'm going? Can you see what I'm trying to point out here? I just showed you the Freire report. From prior investigations, we know that the Brownstone Institute, now we're going to get into the Brownstone a little bit. Now, I've done different shows before. I've read the about page on them before and showed you before that these people are whatever they say that they're fighting for, individual sovereignty, whatever. They're doing it from within the world socialism within the world socialist box of human rights. So from prior investigation, we know that the Brownstone Institute, like the so-called medical freedom movement at large, okay, is an international human rights advocacy organization. And I don't see anybody in the medical freedom movement that has differentiated, not even Ryan Cole, Ryan Cole's out there. I've heard him a few times, espouse our founding principles, founding republic, blah, 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 Constitution. But he has done nothing to call out everybody else in the room that is championing these human rights. Done nothing to differentiate what he stands for from the word collectivism that everybody else in the room with him is pushing. I saw him and talked to him at Pittsburgh too. Sent him a copy of my book. They'll never read it. He won't give two shits. I don't see it. I don't see it happening. From prior investigation, yep. Brownstone Institute. Just like the medical freedom at large. They're nothing but international world socialist human rights advocacy organizations. So they are all doing the same thing. Okay? They're all doing the same thing. They're all promising and advocating the impossible. This is what I'm trying to get out there. They're advocating and promising the impossible, the philosophically, the morally. Now, you get into the morals of collectivism, you get into Kant and all these guys. That the only moral individual in a collective society is that person who lays his life down, who sacrifices himself for the benefit of society, knowing that he has to sacrifice himself, that his is against his own interest. If it's against your own interests and you sacrifice yourself anyway, that is the only moral person in a collective. So the morally, doctrinarily, philosophically, contractually, social contract, thus ultimately in the collective human rights and legally impossible. This is where I'm going. You think that these people are out there and they're fighting for something. It's a trap. They're advocating the impossible. While the collectivist revolution just rolls on and on and on. And every time we sit back, well, let these guys, defend our liberty. And we've got the collectivist revolution itself saying that they're working on defending our liberty when it's actually targeted it for destruction. That's where we are. In defending whatever individual sovereignty, rights, and liberties they say that they're defending, whatever that is, as per the tenets of the world socialist collectivism, actually targeting the individualism that alone allows for even the possibility of individual rights and liberty, the collectivist social contract trap is set. They've set the trap. They've set the trap because in the end of all that collectivism, if you're going to debate within that limited spectrum of debate, if you're going to duke it out from within the tenets of the revolution targeting our liberty for destruction, it's impossible that any of those rights and liberty are going to be left standing in the end. But they might get people just long enough to give it a pass. Because, talk about wolves in sheep's clothing here. Once they say they're advocating for these human rights, and we understand them as our individual rights and liberty long enough, just long enough, that that's all that's left in the world, then they can say, you think you still have your individual rights to this, that, or the other thing, whatever. Doesn't matter. Even your very right to life doesn't matter. It can't be outweighed. You think you have any of that shit? Think again. Are we to believe or understand that all these elite academics, Brownstone, medical freedom movement, doctors, lawyers, intellectuals, all of them, are we to believe or understand that all these elite academics, all these alleged intellectual powerhouses are all really this stupid? Are they doing it because they just don't know? They don't realize? Do you really think they're that stupid? Are they that stupid? that not one among them has differentiated our founding principles, our constitutional republic, our natural, God-given individual and unalienable rights and liberty from the world's socialist collectivism of human rights as an option going forward by mistake. You think they've actually failed to put our actual founding principles and founding individual rights and liberty forward as an option by mistake? You think it's just by mistake that they're not doing that they're not differentiating our founding principles from the world socialism that's targeted them for the destruction? Or is there something that's more maniacal that's afoot here? You know, it's where we're at. It's where we're at. From the Brownstone About page. This is from the About page at Brownstone, okay? Right here. This is a Brownstone About page. I see these people, and I can't help but laugh. Sarcastically. Because if I'm not laughing, I'm going to be crying. The motive force of Brownstone Institute was the global crisis created by the policy response to COVID-19 pandemic of 2020. The trauma revealed a fundamental misunderstanding alive in all countries around the world today. A willingness on the part of the public and officials to relinquish freedom of fundamental human rights in the name of managing a public health crisis. A fundamental misunderstanding. Is the fundamental misunderstanding with the governments that, as he said, had a willingness on the part of the public and officials to relinquish the freedom of fundamental human rights? Is the misunderstanding with them, or is it in the Brownstone? Is that fundamental misunderstanding with the Brownstone because they're not getting it? That the human rights that they're championing are the same collectivism that says that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. That there is no right to self-defense. And as Rousseau's social contract says, we are no longer the judge to which the dangers to which we are to be exposed or that we are expose ourselves to. Or are they just doing it knowing the difference and doing it anyway just to kind of, flying cover for the actual revolution? Are they flying cover for the revolution with this shit? Like flack, I don't know. Brownstone Institute, okay. Yes, they got the fundamental human rights in the name of managing a public health crisis. Brownstone Institute regards the great task of our times as rebuilding the foundation of liberalism, rebuilding the foundation of liberalism as classically understood. Now, classic liberalism is what is the old liberalism. Is like when Hayek wrote Road to Serfdom, he speaks of liberals and liberalism in there, which at the time was our founding principles. Laissez-faire, free market capitalism, okay? So, but then the definition of what liberal had changed into the 70s or 80s, maybe 70s, 80s, 90s. Liberals like Rush Limbaugh started calling people on the left that were progressives, socialists, communists, they were liberals, right? So the meaning of what was liberal in the 1940s and 50s was totally opposite than it was in the 80s and 90s, right? So, rebuilding the foundation of liberalism as classically understood. So, that would be our founding principles. If his classic liberalism is the same as everybody else's classic liberalism. But, so rebuilding the foundation of liberalism as classically understood, which would be our founding principles, including core values of human rights and freedom. So he's correlating human rights and freedoms with classic liberalism, which, if he's doing it on purpose, is maniacally genius if he's doing it as a vanguard of the revolution. Or is the intellectual prowess of these people just freaking that impotent? You know? Including the core values of human rights and freedom. So human rights and freedom as non-negotiable for an enlightened society. Well, the whole Enlightenment. Where are we going to go? The whole Enlightenment is the whole progressivization and secularization of everything, right? The Enlightenment wasn't friendly to our founding principles. John Locke, but they say is part of the Enlightenment, but John Locke's misinterpreted all the time in academic literature. Misinterpreted. Our founders looked up to John Locke and our state of nature and nature's natural law, God's law type thing, and a state of nature that did not eliminate God as collectivism does. But anyways, that's the whole convolution. I'm just trying to point out some convolution here right from the Brownstone. Their human rights advocacy, the convolution, just pointing it out. So, and I got this email back in March, 2025, and they sent it to me. It says, chipping away at the deep state. Here's an incantation from ruling class intellectuals. Ruling class intellectuals on TV. We are not ready for the next pandemic. What possibly could that mean? Who is we in any case? None of these people have an inventory of surgical grubs. None of these people have an inventory of surgical scrubs, maybe? I don't know, swabs, and therapeutics. It's just something that they say to urge on the pandemic planning industry at home and abroad, transferring millions from us to them. They want everyone to be terrified of microbes at a time when chronic disease is setting new records. I got these things highlighted in blue here. The ruling class intellectuals, they say from us, then them. These are key proponents, us, them, the elite against, the plebes or whatever, the oppressed versus oppressor kind of thing. Those are key attributes of populism. Just kind of pointing them out there, what they're doing, because they're part of the populist nationalist right now, right? The populist right. They're not nationalists. The Brownstone intellectuals, a lot of Jeffrey Tucker, he's not a nationalist so much as he is a libertarian, Rothbard, libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, which is, it's all secular. It's more in line with the collectivism of human rights, and he's espousing human rights here, than it is our founding principles. Some smart people are now in a position to change priorities. They will rely on research from the Brownstone. So we're going to start changing things now. The Brownstone is going to start changing some of this. The ruling class intellectuals, the elite of that put the COVID thing on, right? They will rely on, but these new people that are fighting back, right? They're now in a position to change priorities. They will rely on research from the Brownstone-backed repair. Okay, this is the Brownstone. You can't see it, but right here it says Brownstone Institute at the top. You can't see it. You can't see it. This is the paper right here, and I'm gonna read down through. I got some of the stuff just to pull out, just to give you some highlights. This prepare the Brownstone. They will rely on research from the Brownstone-backed repair, which is the world's only academic hub of pandemic planning research. So they got pandemic planning research that they're doing here. They're researching pandemic planning, central planning. These are advocates of medical freedom. These are the Brownstone intellectuals that are pushing back against, and now they're setting up an option, a kind of not a repeal, but maybe a repeal and replace or a replace type of thing, right? Their papers appear regularly in industry journals that are changing the debate. They are changing the debate, but are they? Are they really changing the debate? Are these people in the Brownstones backed repair changing the debate? Or are they just changing the clothes that the debate is wearing? The same old debate is wearing, you know? That's where I'm getting at. So what is repair, right? Per Brownstone repair, okay. Repair, re-evaluating the pandemic preparedness and response agenda. Re-evaluating it. Involves a multidisciplinary team convened by the University of Leeds. The University of Leeds and is led by principal investigators Garrett Wallace Brown, chair of the Global Health Policy at the University of Leeds. David Bell is a clinical and public health physician with a PhD in population health, and a background in internal medicine modeling. It's like the most modeling is like the most out of, if you go into what they refer to as evidence-based medicine. The evidence-based medicine versus evidence-based policy, which I did a whole show on. You should look that up, which is actually the centralization of truth. Evidence-based medicine is just kind of puts out there what the best evidence comes from, what kind of scientific experiments or studies or trials or whatever put out the most scientific evidence, okay? And their most scientific results. And modeling is like the worst of the worst, right? But this is what this guy, David Bell, is. His specialties, clinical public physician with a PhD in population health and a background in internal medicine modeling and epidemiology of infectious disease. And this other person, Blagovesta Tekiva, I don't know how you pronounce that, is a repair research fellow in the School of Politics and Internal Studies at the University of Leeds. And Jean Merlin Van Agris is a repair-funded PhD student at the School of Politics and International Studies at the University of Leeds. These are the principal investigators of the Brownstones repair. And I've got in here, repair is an initiative of the University of Leeds supported by Brownstone Institute to clarify the evidence base in which history's largest public health program is being built. To clarify the evidence base on which history's largest public health program is being built. Well, anyway, he's got this University of Leeds. So, geez. If I'm in the medical freedom movement and I'm a fan of the medical freedom movement, I think the medical freedom movement is doing the right thing as far as, defending our republic, free society, individual rights and liberty, right? No, must be University of Leeds is, what kind of school that is, Though they're Brownstone's working with them. Let's see what the University of Leeds University actually is. They got a sustainable curriculum. Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's sustainable curriculum. Okay. Our Leeds Sustainable Curriculum Framework, will ensure that education for sustainable development becomes embedded within our teaching. Well, what a lot of people don't know is that the term sustainability, sustainable development came out of a United Nations report back in 1987 called Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was a world socialist, working with Maurice Strong out of Canada, who was a world socialist. They came up with this Brundtland report that came up with the term sustainable development, which was basically to come up with Agenda 21 came out of that, which was to basically erode and eliminate like private property and the whole concept of private property, and basically on how to incrementally, through Agenda 21, how to incrementally institute world socialism, communism, okay, on a global level. And but most people don't understand that's what sustainable is. But okay, yeah, their lead sustainable curriculum framework will ensure that the education for sustainable development becomes embedded with our teaching. So they're going to embed this sustainable development into their teaching. What do we mean by sustainability? Sustainability, places a focus on how interrelated environmental, economics, and social challenges impact on planetary and societal health. Societal health, not health, not your and my health. Societal health, the health of society, the right to life to society, the health of society, and prosperity. In 1987, the United Nations Brundtland Report Commission defined sustainable development. Like I said, they saying it themselves. They're making the connection. I'm not making this shit up. We use this together with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals. The redistributive justice of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, all based on human rights, to underpin our definition of sustainability. University of Leeds partner with the Brownstone. It's right there. This is who they are partnering with. Regarding Leeds University United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. University of Leeds. Right here it says University of Leeds. You can't see it right there. But that's what it is. Okay. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, this is from the University of Leeds, makes up a global framework to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. There are 17 goals, each addressing global challenges such as poverty, climate change, peace, and justice for all, which are all interconnected. The intersectionality of these things, right? The sustainable goals, the United Nations sustainable goals, drive our work on sustainability. They are embedded into our teaching. They are embedded. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the redistributive justice, human rights-based redistributive justice of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, all based on the world socialism of Gro Harlem Brundtland and Maurice Strong's Sustainable Development in their Brundtland Report, 1987. Yeah, they are embedded into our teaching through our discovery modules and our sustainable curriculum, as well as our research and operations. Find out more about some of our research and global challenges funded by the Global Challenges Research Fund and the Newton Fund. Watch on the video below how Leeds is making the world of difference. And I'm going to watch the first minute of this.
Our world faces huge interconnected challenges. To reverse the effects of climate change, to promote peace, human rights and social justice, to tackle issues of public health, poor sanitation and many more. At Leeds, the scale and breadth of our research in fields such as health and well-being, global equality and climate action puts us in a unique position to tackle these global challenges. Our global research strategy is outward-looking and ambitious, fostering partnerships and mutual learning between the global north and global south. We are working on 164 projects in over 30 countries. Our strategy is informed by the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the blueprint to build a better world for people and our planet now and in the future. We have transformed our ways of working, harnessing research excellence to focus on interdisciplinarity and building new partnerships in the developed and developing world. Our approach is
Yeah, I wanted you to see that. That's from the University of Leeds and how they're making their world a difference. Partnership with the Brownstone Institute with this repair, right? This is the email that I got. This is the medical freedom from the intellectual powerhouses at the Brownstone Institute, right? Sit back and relax. These people got us, man. They got our back. They got America's back, man. They got our individual rights and liberties back. They got our back. We can chill. Right? Yeah. Oh, I don't know. What are they going to do with that? They've got our back so they can put a knife in it? A collectivist, world socialist freaking knife. That's what I'm saying. Let's just keep looking into who these people are, right? Repair. Okay, this is from this repair here. Repair, another Brownstone page on repair. Repair reevaluating the pandemic preparedness and response agenda involves a multidisciplinary team convened by the University of Leeds, which we just saw is drinking all the freaking Kool-Aid on the world socialism of sustainable development goals, right? Garrett W. Brown, okay, involves a multidisciplinary team convened by the University of Leeds. Garrett W. Brown. Garrett Wallace Brown is the chair of global health policy at the Global Health Policy at the University of Leeds. He is co-lead of the Global Health Research Unit and will be the director of the new World Health Organization Collaboration Center for Health Systems and Health Security. Wait a minute. Aren't they pushing back against the WHO? He is co-lead of the Global Health Research Unit and will be the director of the new World Health Organization Collaboration Center for Health Systems and Health Security. This is the guy that the Brownstone is teaming up with. That is the one of the lead investigators on their repair, right? Just keep reading. All right. His research at Leeds, which is where they have the sustainable development goals that are embedded in Leeds research, right? Remember, we just heard that. Okay. His research focuses on global health governance. Partnered with the Brownstone. His research focuses on global health governance. Not focusing on the elimination of global health governance. His research focuses on global health governance, health financing, health systems strengthening, health equity, and estimating the cost of funding feasibility of a pandemic preparedness and response. So they're pushing the whole pandemic potential of viruses in this too. I mean, they're not calling any of that into question here, right? He has conducted policy and research collaborations in global health for over 25 years. He's conducted policy and research collaborations in global health for over 25 years. This guy's been drinking the Kool-Aid so long, he's probably come nose blind to it. Even if he wanted to push back against it, he's going to be fighting from within that collectivism to push back against the collectivism from within the collectivism itself. It doesn't make any sense. And has worked with NGOs, oh great, national non-governmental organizations, governments in Africa, and all these other places, for the World Health Organization, G7 and G20. But and then I got another thing in here. I just want to dug into this guy, Garrett W. Brown, just a little bit more, just because I was like, what? That Brownstone is bragging about having this guy on there. Like, oh, we're gonna push back against this world collectivism by having this world collectivist guy from a world collectivist university. Yeah, come on. Areas of expertise: global health policy, global health policy, cosmopolitanism, Immanuel Kant, global constitutionalism. What? Global justice, global health financing, health system strengthening, health equity, R2P, deliberative global governance. And this bio comes. This is University of Leeds, again, Professor Garrett Wallace Brown. And this is his profile at University of Leeds. I shit you not. From the Brownstone. This guy's affiliate. The Brownstone sent me an email saying that they're affiliated with this guy. They got this guy that they're pushing back against the WHO and the UN to look out for our, I don't know, individual rights. What are they looking out with this? Teaming up with this? I don't know. Here you have it. Areas of expertise, global health policy, cosmopolitanism. Now, I just went through what these things are, but I kind of was like, what the hell is cosmopolitanism? Global health policy is bad. I mean, globalists, globalism. You're considering your global governance, your global health policy. Then you got this cosmopolitanism. What the hell is cosmopolitanism, right? And I got from Plato, from Stanford University, right? Early modern Enlightenment cosmopolitanism. They got I don't know. Cosmopolitanism is like libertarianism. You can be like anything from a world socialist to a nationalist to anything basically that sees you as an individual as being part of some bigger entity of humanity. Okay. Some cosmopolitans develop their view into a political theory about international relations, a single world state under which all human individuals would be directly subsumed. Oh, that sounds like they're going to be looking out for our individual rights and liberty, right? But then, they got... let me see. If it's in the general interest of everyone to submit to the authority of a state that enforces laws that provide security, then this argument applies worldwide and justifies the establishment of the worldwide Republic of United Individuals. A worldwide Republic of United Individuals, not a plurality of states, and to find themselves in the state of nature vis-a-vis each other. So the nations are in, not just people in the state of nature that before they come into society, but nationalism and nations are in some kind of state of nature which need to be rescued by a human government and a human society that's a global. Do you see what I'm saying? So nations are going to have to surrender their state of nature rights and liberty to the globalist constitution. To a world constitution. Right. A Republic of United Individuals. Sovereignty should reside with the people. Second, he argues that sovereignty should reside with the people and that the concept of sovereignty itself, because it involves indivisibility, implies that there can be but one sovereign body in the world, namely the human race as a whole. So this whole human individual sovereignty in this context becomes the human individual sovereignty in the context that there can be but one sovereign body in the world, namely the human race as a whole. That global human organism again, right? It's the same shit. So this taxonomy of contemporary cosmopolitanism also comes out of this Stanford thing here. Much Contemporary moral philosophy insists on the duty to aid foreigners who are starving or otherwise suffering, at least on the duty to respect and promote basic human rights and justice. This is cosmopolitanism, human rights, okay? A genuinely cosmopolitan theory should address the needs and interests of human individuals directly as world citizens. Cosmopolitanism. This guy, Barrett Brown, right? Is a cosmopolitan. This is what this guy specializes in. This lead investigator that Brownstone is teaming up with from the University of Leeds that has the sustainable development goals embedded into everything that they're teaching in all their studies and experiments. Yeah. Instead of indirectly as state citizens, that is via their membership in particular states. What is needed instead is a theory that focuses not merely on the moral duties of individuals or on the political relations among states, but on the justice of social institutions worldwide and the measures required to attain it. The measures required to attain it. He who wills the ends wills the means also. Right? This cosmopolitan position in the debate over global distributive justice. I just wanted to point out what this cosmopolitan. This is this freaking Garrett W. Brown guy, this intellectual powerhouse that they got our back. This guy's with the Brownstones got our back, right? But anyways, Immanuel Kant. This guy specializes in Immanuel Kant. This Garrett Brown. He's an Immanuel Kant specialist. See Immanuel Kant, social subjectivism as philosophical enemies of a free society. Now, I just want to go down here and read a little bit about Kant so you can understand Kant and what and how he has been sorry. I mean, come on, here we go. It's got to be in here somewhere. Hegel. Kant's self-sacrificial ethics. Now, you want to know what a moral person is in a collective. This guy is a Kantian specialist that's teaming up with the Brownstone. Just to give you an idea of what Kant is and how he has been identified as an enemy of our freedom and liberty, right? Like Plato, Kant believed in the world that consists of two opposing dimensions. Kant's social subjectivism, down here, held that it is the consciousness of mankind taken as a whole group, rather than the consciousness of the individual that creates the world of appearance. The mental structure that is common to all persons is superior to the idiosyncratic knowledge of any given individual. According to Kant, the mind can only get beyond sense experience through postulates that are based on a non-rational faith. These postulates are that a man has free will, the soul is immortal, and God exists. So where it gets kind of confusing here. With respect to moral judgments, Kant maintains that each individual man feels or intuits a sense of oughtness or duty intrinsically, naturally, right? We have a sense of duty. Since the objective, absolute, eternal moral order of being to which man ought to conform is beyond the world of appearances, reason is incapable of determining that what is moral or immoral. Kant thus made true morality exempt from reason by shifting morality from the sphere of reason to a domain of intuition, which is all philosophical enlightenment, philosophical gobbledygook shit, really. I mean, all you're learning here is that you can't ever really know anything about anything in the end. But at the same time, we're getting a point in here that Kant is not about the individual, he's about the collective. Right? A man should act solely for the duty's sake, okay? Which we have a natural we want to do. We want to perform our duties. A man should act solely for the duty's sake, even though the action conflicts with his inclinations and desires, like I was saying before. Because of man's selfishness, depravity, and weakness, he needs a principle to enable him to go beyond his self-will. Okay? You need a principle that's going to help you get past your self-preservation shit and thereby obey a will that is universally valid, such as a principle. The categorical imperative demands that a man behave in a certain way, i.e. from a sense of duty, regardless of his desires or inclinations. Freedom for Kant means self-regulation, the opportunity to act according to the universal law against self-preservation, self-interest. In order to accommodate duty, Kant had to deny the idea of happiness. Selfishness and lifelong obedience to duty without any expectation of reward is required for moral virtue. Moral action is an end in and of itself rather than a means to an end. A man cannot be certain that no portion of his desires is subconsciously motivating him. The closest man can get to Kantian morality is when his desires conflict with his duty and he acts contrary to his own desires. And this is what I was telling you earlier, but you're just seeing it here being spelled out in Kant's philosophy, Enlightenment era philosophy, right? Kant explains that self-sacrificial service to others is one of man's duties. Dutiful altruism, living for the sake of others, right? Dutiful sacrifice, giving up that which you value, i.e. your own happiness or even your life, in favor of that which you don't value, the collective interest, is the hallmark of a virtuous man. If a man's reason or senses are involved in knowing an objective, the object contemplated is unreal. Likewise, if a man's desires, including a man's interest in being moral, are part of the motivation for action, the action itself is immoral. In other words, if you self-sacrifice because you think it's the moral thing to do, then, and you want to be known as a moral person, then you're doing it for your own interest. It's not good enough for Kant's morality. Anyways, I just wanted to point that out. This is that moral Kant shit. Just wanted to put that out there for your consideration. So that's this guy Barrett's. He's a cosmopolitan and specialist with Immanuel Kant. Global constitutionism. What? Brownstone Institution hooking up with global constitutionalists. Global justice, global health financing, health system strengthening, health equity. We know what health equity is, right? Again, the Brownstone hooking up with a guy that's going to give us global justice, redistributive justice for health equity. And R2P, I wasn't even sure what this was. And deliberative global governance. This guy's a global governance guy. Deliberative? On purpose? Deliberate? Right? I don't know. It's like authoritative, deliberate, global governance. I don't know. And this R2P, just to show you what this guy is involved with, this R2P shit. Got a little bit on this R2P. UN Responsibility Act. That's what this R2P stands for. Responsibility to protect. It's responsibility to act or protect, actually. Or intervene. Let me see. Show you this. What is R2P? Responsibility to protect populations from genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. You know, that kind of, that's United Nations responsibility to protect. Or intervene in international affairs of countries not in compliance with human rights in order to prevent violence and genocide. Garrett W. Brown has actually advocated an expansion to this to include preemptively addressing the so-called systemic or structural international determinants of mass atrocities and human rights abuses, such as the globalization of free markets, with the cure of increasingly centralized global economy with more redistributive justice, thereby demonstrating a, quote, more effective concern for individuals. So his concern for individuals is that we make sure that we get rid of free markets and in the actual individualism and make it more collective society, because that's where your individuals are going to be protected. It's nuts. This is the Brownstone, right? This is his article here. I don't know. This Garrett Brown, okay? He wrote this article. And I just wanted to down here I got a little bit of it here. Global responsibility to protect. 3.1 economic drivers undermine state resilience. Okay, in relation to the international community's role in promoting socioeconomic injustice and violence rather than helping support human rights in problem states. In relation to the international community's role in promoting socioeconomic injustice and violence. The international community's role. See, they're putting forward that it's not just states, it's not just nations that are doing this. It's the systemic, structural attributes or conditions of realities of the international community. Okay, is what he's pointing out here. Rather than helping support human rights in problem states, the global finance regime has been linked to local human rights problems. So what he's saying is that it's not, they're pointing out here that it's not just nation states that threaten human rights. It's actually the realities of the international community that has the responsibility to protect these things, that is actually attributing to these human rights violations, these systemic structural attributes or realities of the international community. Now, what do you think they might be? First thing that went out in my head, capitalism, free enterprise, it's got to be, right? Well, let's just look into it to see if, maybe my instincts are way off, right? Yeah. So rather than helping support human rights and problems, the global finance regime has been linked to local human rights problems, and it has been argued that the effects of the global financial crisis show that they should not assume that free markets are the best way to maximize human welfare. The 2008 global financial crisis, and more generally the instability of financial markets, which is one of the things collectivists everywhere are always bitching about: free enterprise, free market capitalism. Markets are unstable, they're unpredictable, and there's winners and there's losers, right? Resulted in the loss of livelihoods, having a detrimental effect on human rights such as access to food. He's complaining that the international community's ties to globalization, capitalism, spread of markets and free markets or whatever associated with that, have been detrimental to human rights such as access to food, housing, education, healthcare, and non-discrimination. In R2P, responsibility to act, terms, deteriorating state finances means states are not able to fulfill their primary responsibility to protect their citizens' socioeconomic rights. Again, a good example would be the inability of states to maintain welfare safety nets that are associated with a decreased risk of atrocities. So he's just saying that, he's not going against any of these things. He's just pointing out that the international community is it got too much of this free market enterprise, too much of this capitalism itself. That's the only difference between, what the United Nations is doing and the whole global governance thing is doing, is that the whole global governance thing he's pointing out actually has too much of the individualism and capitalism and free enterprise itself. Not communist enough for this guy. That's what I'm getting. See also global constitutionalism and responsibility to protect, which was by this guy Garrett Wallace Brown, and another one of repairs, the Brownstone repairs lead investigators, Blagovista Tekeva, I don't know how you say her name. But anyway, or their name, I don't know how you say it. University of Leeds, okay, both of University of Leeds. This article provides the first attempt to systematically investigate R2P's relationship with global constitutionalization, as well as explore its wider implication with regard to global constitutionalism. Okay. Garrett W. Wallace Brown is also the author of a paper entitled The European Convention of Human Rights as a Kantian Cosmopolitan Legal Order. Sit right there. Read some of that. Read that one. As well as the leading co-author of the 632-page Handbook of Global Health Policy. I shit you not. I couldn't believe that. What? Brownstone. This is your medical freedom movement. Brownstone Institute. I don't know if he's actually a fellow at the Brownstone or not. He's partnered with the Brownstone out of Leeds University. He's the lead investigator of the Brownstone back repair, right? Okay, you've got David Bell. David Bell was another one, right? So let's dig into David Bell a little bit. David Bell is a clinical and public health physician with a PhD in population health, and background in internal medicine, modeling, and experiment epidemiology of infectious disease. I got in here that previously he was a director of global health technologies at Intellectual Ventures Global Good Fund. Global Good Fund in the USA. Okay, I got a couple of things to look at there. Program head of malaria and acute febrile diseases at the Foundation for Innovative New Diagnostics, or FIND, in Geneva, and worked on infectious disease and coordinated malaria diagnostic strategy at the World Health Organization. He has worked for 20 years in biotech and international public health. This is a Brownstone guy with over 120 research papers. A Brownstone guy. World Health Organization guy with 120 research publications. I wonder how many of them are championing individual rights and liberty or America's founding principles or our founding republic, right? The limited government of our Constitution, constitutional republic, right? But anyways, I got in here this Global Good Fund. I don't know if that's a misspelling there or not. But anyways, I got a star here by David Bell. All right. I added this pic from another. He's got Brownstone behind him. Previously, he was directed at the His first star as David Bell is also affiliated with Panda. And this is cool. He probably is aware of that because he knows a lot about Panda. He's always talking about Panda and their involvement with the medical freedom movement, right? All the people from the medical freedom movement. He's also affiliated with Panda. That's his thing, David Bell. Okay. The Bell Review at Action World Health, which was co-founded by old friend and key figure along with Alexander Dugin and Steve Bannon's global nationalist uprising, Nigel Farage. I don't know how you see his name. Is also affiliated with Panda and the Bell Review at Action World Health. Action World, you can't see it. It says Action World Health right there. You can see the bottom of the globe. Action World Health, that's him. Okay. Action World Health. Okay. But anyways. Enterprise, which was co-founded by, quote, old friend and key figure along with Alexander Dugin. Who are the figures pushing Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin together? This article right here, okay, out of BBC. And Steve Bannon's Global Nationalist Uprising, okay, a nationalist uprising, Bannonization of British politics. And he got hooked up with Nigel Farage. I don't know how you say his name. But Bannon's been active in geopolitical nationalism and pushing nationalism on a geopolitical scale. And the National Conservative Movement, the International National Conservative Movement, which is, it came to, I think 2019 was the inaugural National Conservative Conference in Washington. Oh, I went over that in my last show, where some of the speakers on that, including our current vice president, spoke on there, what nationalism is. And their Declaration of Independence, they declared their independence from our founding principles there. You watch it. I'm not making this shit up. Okay. So David Bell, associated with Panda, he's got the Bell Review at Action World Health, which was co-founded by Nigel Farage, who is also an old friend and figure with Alexander, an old friend of it was co-founded by old friend and key figure along with Alexander Dugin and Steve Bannon's Global Nationalist Uprising. Nigel Farage. So you got Farage, Steve Bannon, Alexander Dugin, all associated. Nigel Farage was co-founded the organization Dave Bell was in, who has been partners with Steve Bannon and Alexander Dugin in the geopolitical push for nationalism worldwide. Okay? Nationalism, not our founding principles, but nationalism. That at the National Conservative Conference declared its independence from our founding principles, actually. So, because now we've... And Panda is another libertarian organization claiming to be pushing back against the World Health Organization and advocating for the individual sovereignty while simultaneously seeking to restore and advance the world's socialism of human rights. Yeah. Yep. And you can see that right there. Straight out of that. Okay, then I've got this organization here, the Intellectual Ventures for Global Good Fund. Maybe that, yeah, okay, the Intellectual Ventures for Global Good Fund, a.k.a. Gates Ventures. Okay. The Global Good Fund, the legacy of, basically, it's Bill Gates. Okay. It's all Bill Gates. They even got a picture of him right there. Yep. Okay. The third one I got is this innovative that David Bell is involved with. I got the 3 mark here, the 3-star mark. He was the program head for malaria and acute febrile disease at the Foundation for Innovative New Diagnostics, or FIND, which is another Gates-funded public-private partnership, World Health Organization team member. Yeah, that's it right there. Founded in 2003 by a grant by Bill Gates guy's a Bill Gates guy. Bill Gates funded guy. World Health Organization guy. Brownstone. They got our back, man. They got our republic. They got our constitution. They got our medical freedom. They got our back, right? Just dig it into some of these people. Just put this out there so you can know who they are, or see who they say they are, or the organizations that they're involved with say they are. This isn't an opinion. It's just an observation. Just an observation. Putting this out there for your... This Blago Vesta or Vesta Tekiva, not sure how you say her name, she's a repair researcher and research fellow in the School of Politics and International Studies at the University of Leeds. She has a PhD in international relations with expertise in global institutional design. Okay, international law, human rights, and humanitarian response, just like Mary Holland from Children's Health Defense, right? In human rights response, recently she has conducted World Health Organization collaborative research on pandemic preparedness and response. This is your Brownstone intellectual affiliated, that Brownstone has affiliated themselves with on their repair from Leeds University. Do you really think that these are the people that, do you really think they have our individual rights and liberty in their interest? You think that's what they're defending here, when all these people, their whole life have been nothing but global governance, World Health Organizations, United Nations, human rights? You know, the cost estimates and potential for innovative financing to meet a portion of the cost estimate. Her role in repair team, Brownstone's repair team, will be to examine current institutional arrangements associated with the emerging pandemic preparedness response agenda and to determine its appropriateness, considering identified risk burden, opportunity costs, and commitment to representative/equitable decision making. Just so you have it out there to consider. Jean Merlin Van Agres. Jean Merlin Van Agres is a repair-funded PhD student at the School of Politics and International Studies. Okay, at the University of Leeds. He has a master's degree in development economics with a special interest in rural development. Recently, he has focused on researching the scope and effects of non-pharmaceutical interventions during the COVID-19 pandemic. Within Repair Project, Gene will focus on assessing the assumptions and the robustness of evidence-based basis underpinning the global pandemic preparedness and response agenda, with a particular focus on implications for well-being. Here's a clip from another recent paper co-authored by all four Brownstoners that was funded by Brownstone: David Bell, Garrett Wallace, Blagovesta, and Jean Van Agres. I don't know how you say it. Presented as an argument against the collectivism of positive, redistributed entitlement human rights from the perspective of protecting the collectivism of so-called negative liberty rights and human rights. This is the crazy stuff I was trying to get at earlier, and the false dichotomy that they're going to go in there and they're going to say, well, we're going to pit the collective individual rights of humanism against the collective rights of humanism or human rights, right? Humanism is just another world socialism like communism. But should eminence outweigh evidence, the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board reports on pandemic, we went over this a little bit, but moreover, the stance on individualism looks paradoxically in the face of well-entrenched democratic commitments to human rights and liberties. The paradox is interesting because many of the GPMB panel members have the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board's panel members have themselves been staunch advocates for human rights, human flourishing, and well-being. These are all well-known metaphysical foundations related to concepts of human dignity, autonomy, and classical human rights. One explanation for the paradox could be that this is that false paradox between collective human rights and collective human rights and collective individual human rights. These are well-known metaphysical foundations. One explanation for the paradox could be that the panel has intentionally or unintentionally made a strict separation between what are often labeled negative rights and positive rights. See, when you speak of these positive rights and negative rights, it's pretty simple. People get all, it's just too much for me. But positive rights, negative rights, it's pretty simple. If you just take a minute to take it into consideration, if I can figure it out, man, anybody can, you know. Yeah, he says one of the explanation for the paradox, false paradox, could be that the panel has intentionally or unintentionally made a strict separation between what are often labeled negative rights and positive rights. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, where they see the later positive rights as trumping the former, which are negative rights. Particularly in regarding matters of population health. Right. Because in collectivist doctrine, social contract doctrine, the negative rights of what they say is the natural rights of the individual are always going to be subordinate to the positive rights, the redistributive rights, the right that governments are per the same collectivism obligated and responsible for supplying to the collective. Okay. Where our individual rights and liberty, our Constitution doesn't allow the government to have that power. Philosophically, doctrinarily, doesn't allow for it. That's why they have a limited Constitution. It limits the powers of government. You know what I mean? But that's where the confrontation between human rights and our Constitution come in. Once you have human rights law, it pushes up on the government to have responsibilities that the Constitution has limited it from having. The government needs to have that redistributive powers that the Constitution from the get-go has limited the government from ever having those powers because they would be threatening the liberty of the people, the actual and real liberty of the people. Yeah, where they see the later, the positive rights of the collective, the redistributive rights that protect the collective, they see the later as trumping the former, particularly regarding matters of population health. That's how they can come in and say that you have to wear a mask and that you don't have an individual right, human right to not wear the mask, that you need to take the jab because your individual right to not take the jab can't exist if the government is obligated per that same collectivism, per those same human rights, to protect the human rights of the masses over whatever you say that you have. They can't exist. It's impossible. That individual human right to not to take the jab can't exist. It's impossible. Although simplified, a negative right refers to a claim from something, often called a liberty right, whereas positive rights refer to an entitlement to something, often called a social right. You can look at it that way. Positive right is a social right that the government provides. A negative right is a freedom from certain things, often called a liberty right. Historically, there has been a debate about the degree to which these understandings can be separated, whether they are constituting and or whether one set of rights is more fundamental than the other. This debate is not solvable here and perhaps never, yet it does raise an important point for policy protection. Yeah. Yeah, this debate is not solvable here, and perhaps never, yet it does raise an important point for policy reflection. And the reflection would be is that it's unresolvable. It's unresolvable because it's all from the same collectivism. There's nothing to resolve. There's nothing to resolve. They're fabricating something that can be resolved. They're making something out of nothing there, or trying to. You can't have an individual human right that outweighs the collective human right of society, because the individual human right is no less collective. Still a collective right. Individual human rights are still collective rights. They come from collectivism. But anyways, okay, there was some articles in there that is part of this email from the Brownstone, from this repair. There's a couple articles that came out. This one is Individuals and the Basis of Public Health or Nemesis. And in this, just to give you an idea where these people are coming from, this is from all four of those united. It's from the repair, the four lead investigators of this whole Brownstone repair thing. And you can see, individuals and the basis of public health. You can't see the Brownstone right up on top of that. You can see the white letters a little bit, but I don't know why it's like that. Yeah, public health ethics together with basic human rights law. Yeah, I think, let me see what it says. Yeah, human rights are mentioned in that article 7 times. 7 times. How many times do you find the term human rights in any of our founding documents? You might find civil rights, but they're talking about the government's civil obligation to recognize the individual rights and liberty of our people. They're not talking about rights that are of human civil origin. They're not doing that. And that's the fundamental difference between our founding principles and our founding individual rights and liberty and this shit from the world socialism of human rights. The key Brownstone repair perspective takeaway from this article that I got is this. Quote, modern public health ethics have been based on support for populations through the upholding of individual human rights. So they're saying that they are supporting the collective by recognizing the rights of the individual. Public health ethics, together with basic human rights law, are based around the primacy of freedom of choice, otherwise considered the necessity of informed consent, which are also, this informed consent thing is also recognized globally and throughout academia as in the context of human rights, in the context of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, the Sustainable Development Goals and all that shit. I did a whole show on that too. And went down through the paperwork going all the way back to the Nuremberg trials. You can check that out if you want to check that out. Dig a little deeper into that. I can't remember the name of the show, but if you go to my Rumble page, it has all my shows on it. You can look down through the titles and you'll see it. Let me see what else they got. They got in here. They get prominent arguments have been raised against bodily autonomy in the past few years. There are a few good reasons why power in medicine was held to be with the individual patients rather than the practitioner. That goes back to the Nuremberg trial. Firstly, when people are given power over others, they command misuse. They commonly misuse it. This was apparent under the European fascism and the eugenics approaches common in the United States and elsewhere in the first half of the 20th century, actually right up into the 1970s even. I mean, there were aspects of eugenics that were still being implemented Indian Health Service and whatnot. The opposite of authoritarian or fascist ideologies is individualism. I actually don't disagree with that at all. The opposite of authoritarian or fascist ideologies is individualism, which is a mainstay in the history of political thought, where the sanctity of human beings as being ends in themselves requires a profound metaphysical commitment to human dignity. Metaphysical. Autonomy, freedom, and moral worth. Without valuing individualism, informed choice is meaningless. Under most World War II medical ethics, an individual has the right to decide their own treatment in their own context. With the exceptions occur in three areas. First, where a person has a severe mental illness, or where, like Britney Spears, right? Or other major incapacity that impairs the decision making, as above. Any decision that made by others can only take their interests into account. Secondly, where a person is intended to commit a crime, such as deliberately injuring another. Thirdly, in the Syracuse Protocols states where certain rights may be limited to deal with a serious threat to a population's health. In case of an emergency, public emergency, declare an emergency, public health emergency, or other emergency. So here's where your exceptions come in to where in individual rights and liberty that ain't gonna play. But you can see where the planners, central planners in a collectivist society, or the sovereign or the collective, would you have those rights until it's no longer benefits the state or the collective. The Syracuse principles, they call it, on the limitation and derogation provisions in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Just out of curiosity. Yeah, this anyways. The Syracuse principles. They have to deal with a threat to a population's health. In Western nations since World War II, the emphasis was clearly on individual choice. In communist and other authoritarian regimes, the emphasis was on a proclaimed collective good. These are fundamentally different drivers for how society should act in a health crisis. Recent wording related to the World Health Organization's pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response agenda suggests a specific drive to downplay individual rights, bodily autonomy, or individualism. We question here whether a sea change is underway in the international public health crisis. So what they're saying is that in the international push, World Health Organization pushed their recent worded related in the World Health Organization is going towards that collective good scenario. We question here whether a sea change is underway in international public health ethics, and whether medical ethics developed to counter the approaches of European fascism and colonialism are deliberately being eroded to promote a new centrist authoritarian agenda. The Global Pandemic Monitoring Board 2024 annual report. The Global Pandemic Monitoring Board produced its annual report in late 2024. The inclusion of individualism as a major driver of pandemic risk, is backed by just one citation. So what they're saying is that they're kind of complaining here about how the World Health Organization is been including individualism as a driver of pandemic risk that is detrimental to the collective good. Individualism, okay? This is a study, and they based this thing only on one citation of a study that was published in Nature Journal Humanities and Social Science Communications in 2022. As we discuss this paper in detail below, thus the Global Pandemic Monitoring Board, endorsed by the World Health Organization, has raised individualism, presumably bodily autonomy or individual sovereignty. That's where they go with that individual sovereignty stuff. As a driver of harm, to global populations. Now, they start talking about this individual sovereignty. Is there a difference between individual sovereignty, individual liberty, and where are they going with it? I mean, they could mean anything, like the sovereign citizens shit, like Sasha Stone's, crazy world collectivism and all, that medical freedom guru guy. Did a couple shows on him too, on his Christed collectivism. Yeah, just about all the big name medical freedom people in there, from Mickey Willis and Robert Malone. Well, I didn't see Robert Malone in there, but Peter McCulloch, Steve Kirsch has been involved with Naomi Wolf, iconic medical freedom, people all involved with that. G. Edward Griffin himself, Mr. Collectivism, involved with that, where they had that contract of the International, what was it? The International Justice for Natural Justice Institute, International Institute for Natural Justice, where they had a contract that they all signed in blood. I don't know. But anyways, the inclusion of individualism as a major driver of pandemic risk. Thus, we got in here that they've raised individualism as a driver of harm to the public populations. That's the same thing Matthias Desmond was actually talking about in his Psychology of Totalitarianism, that he based all his stuff on Hannah Arendt, who the alienated individual, the isolated individual, which is Marx, did the same thing. Hegel. Basically blaming individualism for all totalitarian states hitherto known to man, including Hitler and Stalin. Stalin's communism and Hitler's National Socialism, fascism. How individualism is getting blamed for the collectivism of Stalin and Hitler is a masterwork of projection. Masterwork of projection. The individualism that collectivism has targeted for destruction is getting blamed for the totalitarian states that collectivism produces. Figure that one out. Yeah. But they're kind of discussing here how individualism is getting blamed for being a pandemic risk here. So, apparently, in direct contravention of prior international norms, such as the Universal Declaration of Rights and Geneva Convention and Associated Rights-Based Protocols and the Nuremberg Codes. See, now we're talking about individualism, how they're shitting on individualism, and then he comes along, and in the same article, these guys, these Brownstone intellectuals that are all these globalists, like we've been saying, global governance, right? Global constitutionalism people, right? The people that this Brownstone's Repair is working with the Leeds University, right? Leeds University. They're all putting this stuff together. They're saying how the World Health Organization is shitting on the individualism, blaming individualism, while apparently in direct contravention of prior international norms, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that collectivism of shitting on individualism cannot be contrary to the Declaration of Human Rights, because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is out of the same collectivism. It's from the same. I mean, not to say that there isn't things in collectivism that don't counter each other, or they're not. Everything's a lot of inconsistencies in collectivism, but this is getting down to the fundamental philosophies of collectivism, and they're saying they're blaming individualism apparently in contravention to the collectivism of human rights and the Geneva Convention associated rights-based protocols. What? Wikipedia? That link was original. I don't do links to Wikipedia unless I'm actually trying to point out what a leftist viewpoint is, because that's what Wikipedia is. I mean, in my experience, there's ways to use it, but yeah, that link comes right out of there. It's an original link. Yeah. So and then it says the Nuremberg Code, to name a few. And like I said, I already said that I did a show on how the Nuremberg Code and the whole right to informed consent that all these people in the medical freedom movement, all these same intellectuals are all pushing for informed consent, and it all goes back to. But they too, I did a whole show on showing you on going back to the Nuremberg Code since World War II, and how these have come to be understood within the context of the same human rights I'm calling into question tonight. Within the context of the collectivism, world socialism of these same human rights. And then the collectivism and the strands of the web come back around, right? And I got a star here. I went, regarding the human rights legacy of the Nuremberg Code and how its informed consent has been viewed as protecting human rights. See, I did a show. It's called "I Want to Trust My Doctor, But I Can't." That's the show right there where I got Mini P. I'm holding Mini P, and it says, "I want to trust my doctor, but I can't." And I get into that a little bit deeper there. That article, this individualism basis of public health or nemesis, continues. Okay. While not actually providing the citation, it claims that the threat of individualism to COVID outcomes looks to be from the same source of that global organization. A 2021 study found that the more individualistic a country, the higher its COVID transmissions and death toll, and less likely its people were adhered to prevention measures. Would adhere to prevention measures. This Hang Huang, I guess, is the guy's author of that study, manufacturing evidence to support a narrative. But that the whole evidence-based policy that's what the whole of evidence-based policy is. I did a whole show on that. It's like one of the first few shows that I did. A group of 4 Chinese academics pushed a research paper in humanities and social science communications in 2022. Individualism in the fight against COVID-19 became the sole source cited as evidence that individualism is a major driver of pandemic risk promoted by the WHO. Well, why wouldn't any Chinese group of Chinese academics, when wouldn't they be anti-individualism? When would they not be anti-individualism and pro-collectivism? It's freaking Chinese, right? Yeah. Yeah, the whole Chinese thing. I mean, they're saying that the Chinese study says evidence collectively suggested that a greater reluctance among people in more individualistic cultures to heed virus-fighting policies impose negative public health externalities in a pandemic. They impose negative public health externalities. That means they run counter to it. By individualism, they mean individualism captures the extent to which people in a society are mentally and habitually empowered to make their own decisions. Boy, you can't have that in a collective. It was funded by the academic institutions in China against, and against measures of individualism. This measure included the number of winners of the Nobel Peace Prize, because they said the Nobel Peace Prize winners made it so that you were a Western society, I guess, more individualistic. The author's explanation of why collectivism is superior to individualism speaks volumes about the concentration on mass compliance within the centralized policies of COVID-19 response. Yeah? That's what collectivism is. Centrally planned. Quote in full, the author of the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx, in his early writings criticized the notion of natural rights found in the Declaration of Rights of Man. Yeah. He criticized the notion of natural rights found in the Declaration of Rights of Man as reflecting only the egoistic part of human nature without acknowledging the community-oriented part of human nature. As a political system, communist regime can cause a shift towards the more collectivist cultural values from the top down, such as through values inculcation by workplace organizations, by political education, and through the control of media by the authorities. Control of media. Everything gets controlled by the government and a collective. Everything. But why would academics from China say anything different? And why aren't this group of Brownstone intellectuals pointing that out? That they're freaking China, they're freaking communists, they're going to say that shit, right? You know, let me see. What else they got in here? And then this mirrors a long-standing debate in political theory where moral justifications to force one to be free, to enhance a form of collective positive freedom, can come with a significant cost to an individual's negative liberty. The latter could be misappropriated to justify some degree of coercion. And curtailment of individual rights and freedom. I get into the negative rights, positive rights again. In practice, getting a correct balance often boils down to the mechanisms to restrain power in which human rights and individualism they seek to protect play a historic role. See, this is right here. Getting the correct balance often boils down to the mechanisms to restrain power in which human rights and the individualism they seek to protect plays a historic role. They're correlating our individualism with human rights. There is no individualism in human rights. It's impossible. If there was an ounce, a molecule of individualism in human rights, there would be a right to self-defense. How can you have individualism in something that doesn't allow the individual a right to self-defense? Doesn't acknowledge it. Right? I mean, all this shit comes into play. The stuff that I'm kind of showing you all comes together. This by itself or that by itself, you might not be able to pick these things out. But once you start putting everything together and you start to you look at the concept as a whole. When we look at the concept as a whole, we can see the alignment of what that whole actually is. And when they try to say it's something that it's not, you can call out the bullshit. You can see the bullshit. And this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to call out the bullshit, this correlation of human rights and our individualism. Just putting it out there for your consideration. That's it. You know, let me see. Healthcare and digital corporations and individuals vested in them gained unprecedented increase in wealth through the restrictions on what many had come to accept as immutable human rights, on restrictions on what many had come to accept as immutable human rights. They weren't violations of human rights per se. They were violations of our actual, natural, unalienable individual rights and liberty that endowed by our Creator. But the restrictions on those, what many had come to accept as immutable human rights. We accepted them as human rights. Now that we've accepted them as human rights, we got to pay that price when it comes time for the responsibility and social contract responsibilities and duties of them being human rights. Do you see what I'm saying? That's what's going on. And one's choice as to how one deals with a threat to one's health. The apparent attack on the concept of individualism, characterized on flimsy evidence as being a major driver of pandemic risk, is consistent with this authoritarian drive in public health. Now, see, this is where the bullshit that I'm calling out in here is that they're correlating human rights and individualism. Continually, over and over and over again, they're driving that nail home. But once you accept the premise, everything else in here they're saying, oh, wow, they're fighting for individualism. They're fighting for individualism, but we're fighting for individualism, the human rights individualism. Then you're like, oh, fuck. But everybody already thinks that human rights are their individualism and individual rights. So there's no threat. They don't see no threat. They're not threatened by it. You know what I mean? So that's how they're winning. That's how they're getting us, is because we don't see a threat to what they're actually, the collectivism that they're actually implementing here. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm seeing. You know, that's what I'm seeing. Okay, yeah. The apparent attack on the concept of individualism as a major driver in pandemic risk is consistent with this authoritarian drive in public health. Self-interest is a strong driver of policy, and the public health community has an unfortunate history in facilitating and abetting those who would abrogate the rights of others for personal gain. The World Health Organization pandemic agreement appears to signal an interest in downgrading the concept of individual rights at the level of international law. Yeah, that's what human rights are. That's what the world socialism of human rights does. The WHO's pandemic agreement appears to signal an interest in downgrading the concept of individual rights. The concept, you're not going to downgrade the concept of individual rights. They're going to downgrade their recognition of what those individual rights are. They're not going to recognize actual individual rights, but they will recognize the collective individual human right of collectivism, insofar as that individual human right is wholly subordinate to the right to society, the right, the collective. You see what I'm saying? And that in the social contract of those individual, in the social contract of those individual collective rights of human rights, you're going to be trained in your mindset of collectivist mindset that you've been trained in to, for spontaneous consent. When a centralized collectivist society with all its people have a collectivist mindset, when they're ordered and told what to do for the better part of the collective, they're going to spontaneously consent. That's right out of Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci called it as new intellectuals. The whole society is going to be trained in this conformism, which are human rights, that's been proposed to them as freedom. That's what human rights are. And these people here, these Brownstone intellectuals, these repair intellectuals out of Leeds University, are convoluting. Are they doing it on purpose? They're convoluting the collectivism of human rights with the actual individual freedom and liberty and rights and liberty of our founding principles, founding republic, and endowed by our Creator, unalienable rights and liberty. Human rights are lienable. They're inalienable. They can't be separated from the social contract, but they're lienable. There is a lien. That's what the social contract is. It's a lien. That's where you get social credit scores from. The lien is you have to score high on you have to maintain a high social credit score, or they take them rights away from you. Our natural endowed by our Creator individual rights are unalienable. There is no lien. There can be no lien. We owe no man for those rights. Nobody, nothing. They're ours, endowed to us by our Creator, out of the jurisdiction of civil human. They're out of human civil jurisdiction. That's why our Constitution was limited the powers of government to make sure that. And we have Article 6, where everybody in our Constitution, Article 6 in the Constitution, where everybody that works for the government and is in government, officers, have to swear an oath to that Constitution, which protect, and defend the Constitution that protects that secures the liberty, of the people. All right. So now we get into the WHO Constitution defines health as a physical, mental, and social well-being. It is hard to see how mental and social well-being are best served by forcing individuals to forego their autonomy and be forced to follow the dictates of others. But that's what collectivism is. History tells us that the power to abuse, but understanding human capital. The achievement of the Nobel Peace Prize in Literature, peace signs, and negative social tendency. Are they signs of a negative social tendency? Because Nobel Peace Prize winners would mean that maybe your society was more individualistic, and the more Nobel Peace Prizes that you have in your society. Others would consider such achievements a sign of human flourishing and advancement. And I got in here the political slant of the Nobel Peace Prize in economics. And they're in here talking about how these collectivists are saying that Nobel Peace Prizes, they counted how many Nobel Peace Prizes each society had and how compliant they were to the dictates of the centralized COVID-19 countermeasures. Okay? Those societies that had more Nobel Peace Prize winners in it were declared individualistic and detriment to the health of the collective. But actually, if you go back and see what the Nobel Peace Prize is in this article here, it says Avner Offer, the co-author of a book on the award, explains how it has legitimized free market thinking over time. Okay, so this is what I'm saying is that this is the reason why, because there's been throughout academia, they say that Nobel Peace Prize winners legitimize free market thinking. And the attempt, and they are this is why they say that, the attempt now to codify the concept that individualism is a threat to health into international law through a draft of pandemic agreement should alarm us all. The somewhat ludicrous level of evidence provided to support it says much of the risk an approach poses and the harm we can expect. Modern public health ethics have been based on support of populations through the upholding of individual human rights. It's modern public health ethics have been based on support for populations through the upholding of individual human rights. Moreover, empirically, there is no crisis demanding an urgent rethink, and the abandonment of individual liberties. Those advocating this change should reflect on the definition of health and why we have designated the individual as the primary unit of moral concern and thus as a chief arbitrator of health care. Modern public health ethics have been based on support for populations through upholding individual human rights. Again, arguing for individual autonomy in our society in the context of human rights. Just showing you. In the end, it's a go nowhere. It's a go nowhere philosophical thought process. It's a dead end, as I've shown over and over. Another article they had in the Brownstone is the state of pandemic preparedness, the WHO and the U.S. withdrawal. That's from that repair. Human rights is mentioned 4 times in this article. And talk about a similar threat of equating individualism to a high level of pandemic risk. Supporting concerns that the notion of diminishing basic human rights and free will is creeping into society. That's what collectivism does. Is, you know. But just going to go down through there. These, the confluence of government and non-governmental interests, such as pharmaceutical companies, private foundations, and trusts, raises issues regarding the very underpinnings of human rights and democracy. Human rights and democracy that I've put out there before and done shows before. The 2 greatest threats to our founding republic are human rights and democracy. Human rights, we convolute our actual individual rights and liberty with the collectivism of human rights. Once you do that, they're gone. And then democracy, I mean, collectivists, Marxists have been calling for open democracy to override our republic. For decades, if not, century, right? Going on a century anyways. At a policy level, fiduciary responsibility to ensure shareholder interests are intermingled with the large public-private partnerships. Again, that's public-private partnerships, or the fascism of public-private partnerships. These intersect with human rights, imperatives of bodily autonomy, and non-coercion. They're going to have a rethink. While the potential for a rethink, they say, while those that directly counter the prevailing pandemic narrative continue to be labeled as anti-science and public health risk by the public health community, repair has more recently experienced greater acceptance of our counter evidence. Oh, why wouldn't it, with all those globalists being involved in it, right? That's all they are. We just saw that, right? Just saying. Yeah. Suggesting the potential for a much wider and deeper debate. It's not going to get any wider, and it's not going to get any deeper. It might get deeper, but it's not going to get any wider because it's all going to be within the scope of collectivism, all within the parameters of the world socialism of human rights, where nothing but the collectivism of human rights can win, and nothing but the actual individual rights and liberty of our founding can do nothing but lose. Yeah. Let me see. The WHO holds an interesting position within this mix. As the only international health body governed solely by member states, it has the theoretical potential to exclude private and corporate influence and an existing mandate to respond to the needs of member states. See, right here, here's where they get into. Let me go back here and read this. The public health industry is currently receiving a large amount of pandemic funding, and will find it difficult to change the health industry, public health industry. It is human nature to resist downsizing and arguing oneself out of a job. Recognition of this human... Come on back to me. Recognition of this human dynamic is key to implementing change. Furthermore, major public-private partnerships such as Gavi and CEPI heavily invested in the pandemic response, and with boards including entities invested in the health commodity market, face intrinsic difficulties in considering a reversal of the correct course. So we've seen all these public-private partnerships, SEPI, Gavi, face intrinsic difficulties in considering a reversal, and because it's against their interest. It's against their interest in to change the system from what it is now, because they're making a profit because of capitalist profits, right? Forces within the U.S. will also lobby against change, especially where large profits are concerned. As a result, despite signs of a growing awareness and the focus of the new U.S. administration, Trump, a thorough rethink of the current direction within the public health industry will still be heavily resisted. You know, the WHO holds an interesting position within this mix as the only international health body governed solely by member states. It has the theoretical potential to exclude private and corporate influences and an existing mandate to respond to the needs of member states. So they're actually proposing that the World Health Organization have more power in order to exclude private and corporate influences? Do you think that's going to end the public-private partnerships? Government partners? It's weird that these people that are fighting against the power of the World Health Organization are actually proposing that the World Health Organization have the power to cut the profits that these people are making off, cut the money line off, you know. While current direction is toward greater commoditization profits, the WHO is bound to comply with the interests of the states and their constituents if the demand rises for clear evidence-based policy. Evidence-based policy is the centralization of truth. It's an actual thing. It's not just a word. There's not just a nothing here. Why are they putting evidence-based policy in there? If demand rises for a clear evidence-based policy and protection of human rights, then in theory the WHO must comply and could act as a bulwark against private invested interests. Have the WHO act against private interest, private business? Well, public-private partnerships aren't private interests. They're government partnership, government partners' interests. In practice, funding from private and corporate interests could incentivize staff to continue prioritizing the pandemic agenda. But the WHO budget is ultimately approved by member states, and such influence could, where deemed necessary by the states, be eliminated. So now the central power of the WHO, World Health Organization, can be utilized to crush what? The public-private partnerships of fascism or the capitalism of private sector profiting? And that's what I'm getting at there. I don't see... There's a conflict of interest in the proposals that they're proposing, at least from a liberty perspective, at least from an individual rights and liberty perspective. They got questions about the new amendments in 2024. This article here, again, the context of human rights, it's mentioned twice in there, but it's all in the context of human rights. You got this repair article here. Oh, let's see, this one. Yep, this is this article here. Trying to see what I can. Sorry about that. Anyways. We got this article here, reevaluating the pandemic preparedness and response, a Genesis repair. Public health serves as a vital role in strengthening population resilience to threats to well-being and response to such threats where they occur. This requires a holistic approach that recognizes both the interconnection between humans and their environment and the broad scope of health. Like One Health maybe? The internationally defined as spanning physical, mental, and social well-being and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Dealing with the pandemics and other health emergencies is an important aspect of public health. And such costs and benefits must include social and mental impacts assessed within the ethical framework that respects human rights. Human populations are diverse in terms of risk, while priorities are influenced by culture, religion, and social factors, as well as competing priorities arising from other diseases. This requires careful policy development and an implementation approach that responds to public need and is consistent with the will of the community. The will of the community. General will. This is another 1031 Prepare article posted by the Brownstone. Right here. Repair, sorry. Note the world socialism of human rights being mentioned 6 times in this article, including clearly any such fundamental change in the approach to public health tried for the first time during COVID-19 requires a strong evidence base. Currently, the evidence base is poorly articulated or absent from documents supporting the international pandemic instruments under development. We are therefore, as a global society, reversing decades of understanding on human rights, health prioritization, and health equity based on underdeveloped assumptions. We are therefore, as a global society, is reversing decades of understanding on human rights, health prioritization, and health equity. What is there about health equity that we're reversing? What is it about human rights that we're reversing? What is it about the collectivism, the world socialism of human rights that we're actually reversing there? You know? I don't get it. Health and human rights here from the health. Human rights must be central to the international health regulations. This is and in this article. This is from 2020. International human rights law recognizes the need for derogation or suspension or limitations of certain rights to protect the public. This is where I'm going. I'm not making any of this stuff up when it comes to. I'm not imagining it out of in thin air. The collectivism, the duties owed, responsibility collectivism, the subordination of the individual collectivism in even the individual human rights of collectivism. It's there, always has been. International human rights law recognizes the need. International human rights law recognizes the need for derogation, which is the suspension of or limitation of certain rights to protect the public. Human rights obligations in public health emergencies. International human rights laws fosters accountability for state obligations to prevent, detect, and respond to the infectious disease, offering frameworks to balance individual rights and public health. There's a balance. balance. Okay? That's another slave speak word is balance. Well, you gotta balance the needs of the collective. Or you gotta balance the rights of the individual as per the needs of the collective. Straight out of collectivism. Collectivism 101. You know? International human rights laws fosters accountability for state obligations to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious disease. Yeah, the state is under human rights and human rights law. It's an obligation. It's the state. It translates into state responsibility, government responsibility to provide. That's why it's a clash with our Constitution, because the Constitution is limiting government from having the power to do these things, while the human rights laws are demanding that the government do these things. That's the clash, and how human rights laws are a cancer that they're eating away from our whole legal system from the inside out. Yeah, notwithstanding the indivisibility of human rights, international human rights law recognizes the need for derogation, suspension, or limitation of certain rights to protect the public. In clarifying human rights derogation, states sought in 1966 International Convention on Civil and Political Rights to identify which rights are derogable. Delimit the grounds for rights derogation, and outline transparent government processes for derogating from international obligations in the context of an emergency. So the governments are excused from their international obligations to provide in the context of an emergency. Okay, health emergency or any other declared state of emergency. Yet, as governments exploited emergency declarations as a pretext to suppress fundamental freedoms and quell political dissent, there arose a need for interpretive guidance to elucidate the grounds that warrant the temporary curtailment of human rights in narrowly defined circumstances. Developed by international law scholars convened by the International Commission of Jurists and other partners, the Syracuse Principles, we've brought this up before. This is the second time we brought these up. On the limitations and derogation provisions in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Syracuse Principles, provided a legal framework to assess restrictive measures developed in response to national emergencies. Adopted in 1984, the Syracuse Principles clarified that the restriction of human rights in the context of an emergency should be undertaken only when, and among other things, such measures are, 1, responsive to a pressing public need. Well, who gets to determine that in a centrally planned collectivist society? Central planning, the planners, the sovereign, the government, the state. Responsive to a pressing public need, for example, protecting public health, deemed necessary and proportionate to a legitimate aim. What best benefits the collective, dude? And prescribed by law, and not imposed arbitrarily, and applied as a last resort using the least restrictive means possible. So all they got to do is prescribe it by law. Just has to be in response to a pressing public need deemed necessary and prescribed by law. So then they can just, they don't have to recognize them. They can suspend the suspension of those individual human rights. And like I said, it's right there in human rights, international human rights law. I'm not making this shit up. they're not the same as our individual rights and liberty of our founding. So not once, at least that I've seen, do they argue against or even suggest the possibility of an argument against the zootonic jump or anything other than SARS-CoV-2, the synthetic foundation upon which the pathogenic potential of any and all of these alleged NRA viruses rests, or the validity of the PCR test as definitive diagnostic determination. And all this from the Brownstone, have we seen anything along those lines at all? And nothing, right? Nothing. They're not pushing back on the narrative of the virus. They're not pushing back on the narrative of pandemic potential. They're boosting it. And there's your social contract lien on any and all collective rights, including individual human/civil rights of human/civil origin. Can you imagine being forced to argue for your life, your right to life, your right to defend your life, your right to be armed in order to do so? In a collective, you can't be forced. You just imagine yourself being forced to argue in that scenario where they have legal ways. It's all set up per the collectivism from which human rights are derived, right here in human rights law, that all they got to do is have a responsive, have it be a response in response to a pressing need for a public need deemed necessary and prescribed by law. That's it. You know, I got some other things that I'm probably gonna wait till another show to go over. Yeah, I think what I'm gonna do is kind of end it here and get into some other things that I've got going here, but I wanted to get this out there about the Brownstone Institute, kind of collectivism in there, how they're just they got these academics that they're working with from this repair thing through Leeds University in England, right? And it's like, you know, we're fighting for this medical freedom movement shit coming, and these intellectuals. But they're arguing against the collectivism, against the centralized collectivism from within the collectivism itself. And collectivism can't cure collectivism. Only the individualism of our natural, endowed by our Creator, individual rights and liberty can do that. And I don't know, I just hate to see so many people getting duped. You know? Like I've gone over in my other shows before, I mean, we've been undergoing 150 years anyways of this collectivization of our mindset, of American mindset. And multiple shows that I've done, I point these things out on where they come from. In the Brownstone Institute, the intellectuals at the Brownstone Institute, far from advancing or defending our natural individual rights and liberty, our republic, our founding our founding principles, or the whole idea of America, far from championing them, defending them, or advocating for them, they're actually working to sabotage it all by working within the same collectivism. They're advocates of the same collectivism. They're not thinking outside the collectivist box. They can't think out of the side. They can't think out. Maybe they just can't think outside the collectivist box. Maybe they don't have the wherewithal to do that. mental metanoia, as Dr. James Thorpe called it. He said only 1% of people out there have the mental metanoia to be able to call into question your own intellectual lack of intellectual ability to think outside the collectivist box you've been stuffed into and trained into. They've all gone through the dip. They're all academics, intellectuals, right? Well, I hope you got something out of the show today. Again, just listen to what people are saying. Don't take for granted that you understand what they're saying, that they're on the same side, that they're thinking the same thing, because really, they call human rights and they talk about human rights and they're correlating to our individual rights. They're correlating them to individualism, which the collectivism is actually targeted for destruction. We need to be able to decipher what our actual individual rights and liberty are, what our actual founding principles are, and what these people are saying that they're defending, because it's definitely not what they're defending. They're definitely not defending our founding principles. I mean, come on. I mean, Jeffrey Tucker, Brownstone Institute, he's a von Mises guy. He told me he was a von Mises guy, a follower of Rothbard, right? Von Mises libertarian. They're all followers of Rothbard, the guy who said our whole Constitution and Republic was illegitimate, right? Because our founders stole it from the anarchists, supposedly, who I don't know. But anyways, if you're defending our Republic, you're not going to do that by advocating a philosophy that calls our constitutional republic illegitimate. It's just not going to happen. Fighting for the impossible, advocating for the impossible, and that's what Brownstone is doing. It's what the whole medical freedom movement is doing. Advocating the impossible, running the clock out, doing it, because sooner or later they're gonna call it. They're gonna call our debt. They're gonna call our debt on this collectivism, and it's gonna be all about rights and responsibilities. And there's going to be a rude awakening for a lot of people when that day comes, and it's inevitable. I hope you got something out of it. Thanks for stopping by The Liberty Perspective, and I look forward to the next show. Thanks. Bye.